I gave that company 6 years of my life. 6 years of skipped dinners, missed weekends, and 2 a.m. emergency fixes that nobody ever saw. I built the entire sales system from the ground up. Every line, every automation, every failsafe that kept millions of dollars flowing every single Black Friday. And on a Tuesday morning, 4 days before the biggest sales week of the year, my manager called me into that glass office, slid a termination letter across the table, and smiled. Like he'd won something. Like I was nothing. He had no idea, not even a clue, that every single dollar Dravex was about to make that Black Friday ran through systems that only I knew how to control. He didn't fire an employee that morning. He pulled the pin on a grenade, and he was still standing in the room. My name is Caleb Merritt, and I want to be clear about something before I tell you this story. I was never the loudest person in the room. Never the one angling for promotions. Never the one who stayed late just to be seen doing it. I stayed late because the work actually needed to get done. Because if I didn't do it, nobody would. That's the kind of employee I was. The kind companies depend on completely and acknowledge almost never. I joined Dravex Solutions in Columbus, Ohio, 6 years ago as a sales systems analyst. Mid-size retail company, about 400 employees, decent revenue, aggressive quarterly targets. When I walked in on my first day, their sales infrastructure was a mess. Outdated software, manual processes held together with spreadsheets and prayer, zero automation. Orders were being processed by hand during peak seasons. It was embarrassing for a company their size. So I got to work, quietly, methodically. Over 3 years, I designed and built a custom sales dashboard and automation pipeline completely from scratch. I integrated inventory systems, payment processors, regional distribution data, and real-time analytics into one centralized platform. During Black Friday specifically, their single biggest revenue week of the entire year, that system was processing anywhere between $800,000 to $1.2 million in transactions daily. Every discount trigger, every flash sale automation, every order routing decision ran through infrastructure I had personally architected, and almost nobody above me actually understood what that meant. To most of the executives, I was just the systems guy, the one you called when something broke, the one whose name appeared on no press releases, no company newsletters, no quarterly win announcements. That suited my manager just fine. His name was Derek Paulson, Director of Sales Operations, 12 years at Dravex, politically untouchable, and absolutely masterful at one specific skill: taking credit for other people's work without ever leaving fingerprints. Derek had the kind of confidence that came not from competence, but from never being held accountable. He wore it like a tailored suit, smooth in every meeting, charming with every executive, completely unbothered by the fact that he couldn't have explained our system architecture if his career depended on it. Which, as it turned out, it eventually did. For years I watched Derek present my work as collaborative efforts, watched him casually drop phrases like, "Our team built this," and "We developed this solution," in front of VPs who had no reason to question him. I watched him collect performance bonuses tied directly to system uptime metrics I maintained. And every single time, I told myself it didn't matter, that the work spoke for itself, that eventually the right people would notice. That's the lie quietly competent people tell themselves. Right up until the moment someone decides they're no longer convenient. The first sign something was wrong came 3 weeks before Black Friday. Derek stopped including me in planning meetings. Not dramatically, no announcement, no explanation, just quietly. My calendar invites stopped arriving. I noticed it the second week when my colleague Jenna forwarded me a meeting summary, and I realized I hadn't been in the room for a discussion about Black Friday system load capacity. A discussion that was literally about infrastructure I had built and maintained. I brushed it off, told myself it was an oversight, sent Derek a casual message asking if I should be looped in. He replied 4 hours later with 2 words: "We're covered." That response sat in my stomach like a stone. The second sign came a week later. I was walking back from the break room when I passed the small glass conference room near Derek's office. Through the glass I saw Derek sitting across from 2 people I didn't recognize. Both in business casual, both with laptops open, both looking very comfortable for visitors. I asked Jenna quietly who they were. She hesitated for just a second too long before telling me they were from an IT consulting firm. "Just a routine vendor meeting," she said. But her eyes didn't match her words. I went back to my desk and kept working. But something cold had settled in my chest, and it wasn't leaving. The third sign I didn't see coming at all. It was Tuesday morning, October 29th, 4 days before Black Friday week officially kicked into high gear. I had arrived early, 7:45 a.m., because I had system diagnostics scheduled before the daily traffic load increased. I was halfway through my second coffee when Derek appeared at my desk. No email, no calendar invite. Just Derek, standing there in his pressed shirt with that carefully neutral expression he wore when he'd already made a decision and was just performing the delivery. "Caleb, conference room B, now." The HR representative was already seated when I walked in. That's when I knew. You always know when HR is already in the room. There's a specific stillness to it, like the air has been arranged. Derek sat across from me and didn't waste time. There was a documented performance concern, he said. Missed deadlines, communication gaps, a pattern of not meeting expectations. He spoke in that calm, practiced tone of someone reciting a script they'd rehearsed multiple times. The HR rep slid a termination letter across the table without making eye contact. My brain went completely quiet. 6 years of 2 a.m. emergency calls. 6 years of covering system failures before they ever reached the executive level. 6 years of documentation, maintenance logs, architecture upgrades. And Derek was sitting across from me, reading from a list of fabricated performance issues with the practiced calm of a man who believed he had already won. I looked at that letter, then I looked at Derek, and something shifted inside me. Not anger, not yet, something quieter and far more dangerous. A sudden, crystalline clarity. I signed the acknowledgement form, stood up, and without a single word to Derek, I walked back to my desk, collected my personal items, and followed the security escort to the door. The last thing I did before handing over my badge, so small Derek never noticed, was check one thing on my phone. The system was already running on my credentials. I sat in my car for 23 minutes without moving. Not because I was devastated, not because I was planning anything. I just couldn't make myself turn the key. Like my body needed a moment to catch up to what had just happened. The parking lot was quiet. A few employees were trickling in through the main entrance, coffee cups in hand, completely unaware that the person who kept their entire operation alive had just been walked out the door in a cardboard box. I stared at the Dravex building through my windshield. That glass lobby I had walked into 6 years ago as a nervous 28-year-old who just wanted to do good work. I remembered being proud of this place once, genuinely proud. The kind of pride you feel when you build something real inside a company, when you look at a system humming perfectly during the highest pressure week of the year and think I made that work. My phone buzzed. It was my wife, Rachel, a check-in text. "How's your morning?" I held the phone for a long time, put it face down on the passenger seat. I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. Saying it out loud would make it completely real, and I needed another few minutes inside this strange suspended quiet before that happened. Because here's what nobody tells you about being fired after 6 years. It's not just anger, it's not just humiliation. It's this disorienting grief that hits you in waves. Grief for the version of yourself that believed showing up and doing excellent work was enough. Grief for every Saturday morning you chose your laptop over your family because the company needed you. Grief for the quiet assumption that loyalty meant something, that competence was its own protection. I had believed that. For 6 years I had genuinely believed that. Derek had just taught me exactly how naive that was. And then, almost without warning, the grief cracked open into something else entirely. A memory surfaced, sharp and sudden. 3 years ago, Q4 planning meeting. I had stayed up 2 straight nights fixing a catastrophic data migration error that would have collapsed our entire inventory sync going into the holiday season. I fixed it, completely, silently. Nobody on the executive floor even knew it had happened. And at the next all-hands meeting, Derek stood at the front of the room, and talked about how the team had navigated a complex system challenge with impressive efficiency. The team, I was home sleeping for the first time in 48 hours when he said that. Another memory. My last performance review, 8 months ago. Derek had rated me meets expectations across every category. No raises, no recognition. When I pushed back, professionally, with documented evidence of system improvements and uptime metrics, he smiled that smooth, practiced smile and said, "Caleb, sometimes it's not just about technical output." I remember driving home that evening and telling Rachel I thought maybe I was being paranoid, that maybe I wasn't seeing the full picture. She had looked at me across the dinner table with an expression I didn't fully understand at the time. She understood it. She had understood it long before I was willing to. I picked up my phone, didn't call Rachel. Instead, I opened my personal notes app, a habit from years of meticulous documentation, and I started writing. Not recklessly, not emotionally, just facts. Clean, precise, time-stamped facts about everything I had built, everything I owned, and everything Derek had just assumed would transfer to whoever he was planning to replace me with. Because that consulting firm, those two people in the glass conference room, they weren't a vendor meeting. They were my replacement. And somewhere in the space between grief and cold fury, I realized something that straightened my spine and steadied my hands completely. Derek had spent weeks planning how to remove me, but in all that careful planning, he had forgotten one fundamental thing. He had never once asked me how the system actually worked. I drove home slowly. No music, no phone calls, just silence, and the quiet hum of something forming in my mind. Not rage, not impulse, but something far more precise, the kind of thinking that only happens when every emotion burns away and leaves pure clarity behind. Rachel was working from home when I walked in. She took one look at my face and stood up from her desk immediately. I told her everything. Sitting at our kitchen table, coffee going cold between my hands, I laid it all out. Derek, the termination letter, the consulting firm, 6 years reduced to a fabricated performance complaint, and an HR rep who couldn't make eye contact. Rachel didn't say "I told you so." She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she reached across the table, put her hand over mine, and said very quietly, "So what are you going to do?" That question, the way she asked it, not panicked, not devastated, just steady and certain, like she already knew I had an answer forming. That's when I understood why I had married her. I spent the rest of that Tuesday doing something Derek never anticipated. I reviewed everything, methodically, carefully, legally. First, my employment contract. I read every line with the kind of attention I should have given it years earlier. And there it was, a distinction that most employees never think to look for. The difference between work product created on company time using company resources and intellectual work developed independently using personal tools and personal time. I had built the core architecture of DravX's sales system, but significant portions of the underlying framework, the automation logic, the custom API integration layer, the dynamic pricing engine, I had developed during evenings and weekends, running on software licenses I personally owned and paid for. Derek had fired me so fast, so arrogantly, that he had never stopped to ask what exactly the company owned versus what I owned. I made a list, precise, documented, time-stamped it with development logs I had kept out of pure professional habit. Then I called an employment attorney, a friend of a friend in Columbus, who specialized in exactly this kind of situation. I laid out the facts calmly. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then said, "Caleb, you have significantly more leverage here than you probably realize." I told him I was beginning to understand that. Second, I reached out to Jenna, carefully, not to vent, not to recruit her into anything messy, just a simple text. "Hey, you doing okay? Heard things are a little hectic." She called me back within 8 minutes, and what she told me in the next 12 minutes confirmed everything I had suspected, and then some. The moment I had been escorted out, Derek had walked the two consultants directly into my former workspace. He had given them my system documentation, the surface-level documentation I had written for basic onboarding purposes, and told them Black Friday operations needed to be fully transitioned within 72 hours. The consultants had spent 3 hours reviewing the documentation before telling Derek they needed more. Specifically, they needed the back-end access credentials, the API configuration keys, and the automation scheduling logic, none of which was in any documentation I had ever written down. Jenna said Derek's response to that information had been to tell them to figure it out. Then he had closed his office door. By Tuesday evening, the system was already showing its first error flags, minor ones, the kind only I would have recognized as early warning signs of something much larger coming. The consultants didn't recognize them. Derek certainly didn't. To everyone still inside Dravex that evening, everything looked functional, surface level stable. But I knew that system the way a surgeon knows anatomy. And I knew exactly what those early error flags meant. Wednesday morning was coming. And after Wednesday, Black Friday. I slept better that night than I had in months. Not because I had done anything, but because for the first time in 6 years, I wasn't carrying Dravex solutions on my back while someone else took the bow. That weight was Derek's problem now. And then Wednesday morning, at 8:17 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID stopped me completely cold. It wasn't Jenna, it wasn't HR, it wasn't Derek. It was Marcus Webb, Vice President of Sales, the second most powerful person in the entire company, calling me directly, personally, from his cell phone. I let it ring twice, picked up on the third. "Caleb," he said, and I could hear it immediately in his voice. That particular tension of a man who has just discovered something has gone very wrong. "I think we need to talk." I didn't say anything immediately. I let the silence sit for just a moment, not out of games or strategy, but because I genuinely needed a second to compose myself. Marcus Webb did not make personal phone calls. In 6 years at Dravex, I had spoken to him maybe 4 times, always in group settings, always with Derek positioned carefully between us like a buffer. The fact that Marcus was calling me directly, personally, from his cell, told me everything about how far the situation had already unraveled inside that building. "Marcus," I said, calm, measured, "I'm surprised to hear from you." He cleared his throat. "Caleb, I'm going to be straightforward with you. I came into the office this morning and found out, and I want to be very clear. I found out this morning that you were let go yesterday." I waited. "I didn't authorize that," he said. And there was something in his voice beneath the professional composure, something tight and controlled, that told me he was significantly more than just surprised. "That termination was not approved through my office. I am still trying to understand exactly how this happened, and I want you to know that conversation is happening right now internally." My grip on the phone tightened slightly. I kept my voice completely even. "I appreciate you telling me that, Marcus. I need to understand something from you directly," he continued. "The consultants Derek brought in, they're telling me they cannot get full operational access to the sales system. They're saying there are components they can't locate documentation for. I need to understand the scope of that situation before Thursday." And there it was, the real reason for the call. Not concern for me, not entirely. The revenue clock was already ticking, and Marcus Webb was smart enough to know that a Black Friday system failure would not be a Derek Paulson problem. It would be a company problem, a board-level problem, a his problem. I told him I understood his concern. I told him I would be happy to discuss the situation further. And then I said very carefully, "Marcus, before we go further, I think there are some things about this termination you should probably know. Things beyond the system access situation." Silence on his end. Then, "Go ahead." So I told him, calmly, factually. No emotion, no dramatics, just clean documented truth delivered in the same methodical tone I had used in every technical briefing for 6 years. I told him about the performance complaints Derek had cited, none of which had appeared in any prior review, none of which had been raised with me formally before the termination letter. I told him about the consulting firm Derek had been meeting with privately for weeks. I told him about the timing. 4 days before Black Friday, immediately before annual bonus calculations. Then I told him the part that made the line go completely silent for almost 10 full seconds. Marcus, based on what I know about Derek's recent conversations internally, and I want to be careful about how I say this, I believe the plan was to outsource my entire role after Black Friday. The budget difference between my salary and the consulting contract would have been presented as a cost-saving initiative, and that cost saving would have been directly tied to Derek's performance bonus calculation for Q4. The silence that followed that statement had a different quality to it. The kind of silence that happens when someone is simultaneously absorbing information and rapidly recalculating everything they thought they knew. "Caleb," Marcus said finally. His voice had changed. The professional warmth was gone, replaced by something harder and more direct. "How confident are you in what you just told me?" "Confident enough to have already spoken with an attorney," I said quietly. Another silence, shorter this time. And then, from somewhere in the background of Marcus's call, muffled but unmistakable, I heard a voice I recognized instantly. Derek. Apparently in the same office, or just outside it. His tone was the one I knew well. The smooth, managing, everything is under control voice he used with executives when things were very much not under control. Marcus covered his phone for a moment. When he came back, his voice was precise and clipped. "Caleb, I'm going to need to call you back within the hour. Do not make any decisions until you hear from me again." The call ended. I set my phone on the kitchen table and looked at Rachel. She was watching me from across the room, both hands wrapped around her coffee mug. "Well," she said. "Derek acted alone," I told her. Marcus had no idea. Rachel set her coffee down slowly. "So Derek fabricated the whole thing. Performance complaints, the timeline, everything, just to pocket the budget difference as a bonus. That's what it looks like." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Caleb, he didn't just steal your credit for 6 years. She looked at me steadily. "He was going to steal your entire salary and call it a win." I nodded. And right on cue, before either of us could say another word, my phone lit up again. This time it wasn't Marcus, it was Jenna. And she was typing in all capitals, CALEB. "The system just went down. Completely. Derek is losing his mind. The VP of Operations is in the building. This is bad." I read the message twice, set the phone face down on the table, and for the first time since Tuesday morning, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not satisfaction exactly, something quieter than that. The grenade had finally gone off, and I was standing very far from the room. Marcus called back in 43 minutes. Not an hour. 43 minutes, which told me everything about how fast things were deteriorating inside that building. I picked up on the first ring this time. He didn't open with pleasantries. He didn't ease into it. Marcus Webb went straight to the point with the kind of directness that only emerges when a man is watching millions of dollars evaporate in real time and has completely run out of patience for careful corporate language. "Caleb, the system is down, fully. We have Black Friday inventory queued, flash sale automation scheduled, 3 regional distribution centers waiting on order routing signals, and nothing is talking to anything. The consultants Derek brought in have been working on it for 4 hours, and they are telling me they need at minimum 2 to 3 days to even understand the architecture before they can attempt a fix." He paused. "Let that land. We don't have 2 to 3 days." I kept my voice completely neutral. "I understand. I need to know if you're willing to come back in and resolve this." A brief pause. "And I need to know what that looks like from your side." This was the moment. 6 years of invisible work, stolen credit, fabricated performance reviews, and a termination designed to funnel my salary into Derek Paulson's bonus check. All of it narrowed down to this single conversation. I had thought about this moment since Tuesday morning in that parking lot. I had thought about it calmly, clearly, without anger distorting the edges of my thinking. I did not raise my voice. I did not lecture him about loyalty or fairness or what Derek had done. I simply opened the Notes app on my phone, the same one I had started filling on Tuesday, and I began speaking. "Marcus, I'm willing to help, but I want to be transparent with you about what that requires." "Go ahead," he said. I could hear him reaching for something to write with. "First, my termination is formally rescinded, in writing, today. Not pending review. Not subject to committee. Today. With full back pay for the period I was off. Silence. Then, okay? Second, my role is reclassified. I'm not returning as a sales systems analyst. I'll be returning as Director of Systems Architecture. Separate reporting line. I report directly to your office, not through sales operations. A longer silence this time. I let it breathe. Didn't fill it, didn't soften it. That's a significant structural change, Marcus said carefully. It's a structural change that reflects what my role has actually been for the last 4 years, I replied evenly. I built and maintained infrastructure that processes over $1 million in transactions during peak week. The title should match the responsibility. Another pause. All right. What else? Third, compensation adjustment to match the new title. I'll have a specific number to your HR director by end of day. I moved without hesitation to the final point. And fourth, I need written confirmation that the circumstances of my termination are under formal internal review. I'm not asking for a specific outcome. I'm asking for confirmation that the process is happening transparently. Marcus was quiet for a moment that felt much longer than it actually was. Caleb, he said finally, I want you to know, and I mean this, what happened this week should not have happened. What Derek did was not sanctioned, it was not ethical, and it is being dealt with as we speak. I am personally embarrassed that someone who contributed what you have contributed to this company was treated this way. I appreciated that. I genuinely did. But I also knew that corporate sincerity and corporate action were two very different things. I appreciate that, Marcus, I said. The written confirmations will make sure we're aligned. A short silence. Then something I hadn't expected. A quiet exhale that sounded almost like a tired laugh. Fair enough. I'll have legal draw up the documentation within the hour. Can you be on site by early afternoon? I can, I said. One more thing, Marcus added. His voice had shifted, quieter, more deliberate. Derek will not be in the building when you arrive. I want to make sure you know that. I didn't ask what that meant exactly. I didn't need to. When I walked back into Dravex Solutions at 1:15 p.m. that Wednesday, no cardboard box, no security escort, no termination letter. The 2 consultants Derek had hired were still sitting in my former workspace, surrounded by open laptops and expressions of pure technical defeat. They looked up when I walked in. One of them started to say something. I gave him a polite nod, sat down at my desk, and opened my system terminal. It took me 47 minutes to fully restore operations, every automation pipeline, every inventory sync, every order routing signal across all 3 distribution centers. 47 minutes to undo 4 hours of consultant confusion and 48 hours of Derek Paulson's arrogance. When the dashboard lit back up, every metric green, every system humming, transaction processing resuming in real time, I heard someone in the operations center down the hall actually exhale out loud, like they'd been holding their breath since morning. I leaned back in my chair, looked at the screen. 6 years of work, right there, undeniable, unignorable. Finally, completely, impossible to misattribute. My phone buzzed. A text from Jenna. Just 3 words. You absolute legend. I smiled, put the phone in my drawer, and got back to work. Black Friday came and went without a single system failure. $1.4 million in transactions processed across the peak 48-hour window. Every flash sale triggered on schedule. Every inventory sync clean. Every regional distribution center communicating perfectly. Record numbers for Dravex Solutions. The best Black Friday performance in the company's history. And every single dollar of it ran through infrastructure that, 4 days earlier, a man in a pressed shirt had decided was replaceable. I didn't celebrate loudly. That's not who I am. Rachel made dinner that Friday evening. Nothing special, just pasta and a bottle of wine we'd been saving for something worth opening. We sat at the kitchen table and I told her the numbers, and she raised her glass, and that was enough. That was more than enough. The weeks that followed moved quickly in the way that consequential things sometimes do once the crisis passes. Derek Paulson was placed on administrative leave the same Wednesday I walked back into the building. The internal review Marcus had promised moved faster than I expected, likely because the evidence was clean, documented, and deeply embarrassing for the company. What the review uncovered went further than even I had anticipated. Derek had not only fabricated my performance issues, he had been quietly manipulating departmental budget reports for 2 consecutive quarters, rerouting projected cost savings into a bonus justification framework that HR had never fully scrutinized. My termination was the final piece of a scheme he had been constructing for months. He resigned before the review formally concluded. I heard through Jenna that he had quietly negotiated his exit to avoid the messier alternative. I didn't feel triumphant when I heard that. I felt something closer to tired relief. The particular exhaustion of finally being free of something that had been quietly draining you for years without your full awareness. My new title became official in the second week of November. Director of Systems Architecture. Direct reporting line to Marcus Webb's office. The compensation adjustment was significant. Not just fair, but genuinely reflective of what my role had always actually been. The back pay arrived in a separate deposit that Rachel and I used to finally finish the basement renovation we'd been putting off for 2 years. Small thing, but it mattered. The 2 consultants Derek had hired were quietly released from their contract. One of them, to his credit, sent me a brief professional email acknowledging that the system architecture was, in his exact words, genuinely impressive work. I appreciated that more than I expected to. Jenna got a long overdue lateral promotion to Systems Operations Coordinator, a position I recommended directly to Marcus based on the support she had quietly provided during the most difficult week of my career. She cried a little when I told her, then immediately composed herself and pretended she hadn't. I pretended I hadn't noticed. That's the kind of professional relationship worth protecting. But here is the thing I keep coming back to. The thing that sits with me even now, when the dust has completely settled and the calendar has turned and Dravex is already planning next year's Black Friday infrastructure upgrades. I almost didn't fight back. Sitting in that parking lot on Tuesday morning, in those 23 minutes of suspended silence, there was a version of me that was ready to just absorb it. To grieve quietly, update the resume, and tell myself that moving on gracefully was the dignified choice. That version of me had spent 6 years believing that quiet competence was its own reward, that the work would speak loudly enough without me ever raising my voice. And maybe in a perfect world that would be true. But this is not a perfect world. This is a world where Derek Paulsons exist in every industry, in every company, in every open-plan office with glass conference rooms and quarterly bonus structures. Men and women who have mastered the art of positioning themselves above the people doing the actual work, absorbing the credit, deflecting the accountability, and smiling across termination tables at people who gave everything and asked for very little. The only thing that changed my trajectory in that parking lot was documentation. Years of careful, habitual, unglamorous documentation. Development logs, time-stamped personal notes, a clear understanding of what I owned versus what the company owned, and the willingness, finally, after 6 years, to treat my own work with the same seriousness I had always given to theirs. That is what I want anyone in a similar position to hear most clearly. Not the revenge, not the system crash, not the phone call from the VP, or the title upgrade or Derek's resignation. The documentation, the self-awareness, the moment in the car when I chose clarity over grief. That was where everything actually turned. If you are watching this right now, and something in this story felt uncomfortably familiar, the invisible workload, the stolen credit, the quiet assumption that your excellence would eventually be recognized without you ever having to demand it, I want to say something directly to you. You are not paranoid. You are not ungrateful. You are not difficult for wanting to be seen accurately for what you actually contribute. Some people will always build, and some people will always position themselves to take credit for what builders create. That dynamic is as old as corporate America itself, and it will not change because you work harder, or stay later, or swallow your frustration more professionally. The only thing that changes your position in that dynamic is awareness, documentation, and the willingness to understand your own value clearly enough that when someone tries to tell you that you are replaceable, you already know exactly how wrong they are. Derek Paulson forgot one fundamental thing. He forgot that systems don't run on org charts. They run on knowledge. on years of accumulated expertise that cannot be handed to a consultant in a folder and operational within 72 hours. He forgot that when you spend years making something work invisibly, the invisibility is not a weakness. It is the entire point. Because the moment it stops working, everyone finally understands exactly where the real power was sitting all along. I am not telling you to be difficult. I am not telling you to hold companies hostage, or burn bridges, or carry bitterness into every room you enter. Bitterness is expensive, and it spends your energy on people who are not worth the cost. What I am telling you is this: know your worth before someone else tries to define it for you. Document everything. Understand your contracts. Build things that matter. And if the day ever comes when someone slides a termination letter across a table and smiles like they have won something, let them smile. Then let them spend 4 days figuring out what they just lost. If this story hits something real for you, if you have ever been the invisible backbone of something that someone else took credit for, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, share it with them. Sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone is simply show them they are not alone in what they are carrying. Take care of yourselves. And remember, the quietest people in the room are sometimes holding the whole thing together. Until next time.